Okay, let's dig into this. We've got a whole stack of sources here talking about this absolutely massive piece of legislation. Over 1,000 pages, apparently.
Yeah, it's huge.
Covering, well, everything. Taxes, borders, security, even AI, We're talking about President Trump's one big beautiful bill, the OBBB.
That's the one.
And it just squeaked through the House, like by a single vote.
Exactly. And reading through these materials you sent over, it's clear it's incredibly comprehensive and, yeah, stirring up some really strong reactions already.
Absolutely. So our goal here for you listening is to kind of unpack the key things from these sources. We want to help you navigate what's actually in this thing and look at the different responses, the criticisms. Some are pretty wild, honestly, just so you can get a clearer picture of, what's going on.
Yeah, what really jumps out from the sources is just the sheer breadth of it. It's not targeting one single area. It's like a full spectrum approach. Hits loads of different parts of government, the economy.
It definitely feels that way. So looking at the sources, what do they usually point to first? What are the main pillars, the big pieces of this OBBB?
Well, often they start with taxes. That seems to be a major focus. A really big item mentioned is making those 2017 individual income tax cuts permanent. And the estate tax cuts, too.
Right, the 2017 ones.
Yeah.
Okay, and beyond making those permanent, did the sources mention any temporary tax cuts, things with an end date?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There are some temporary things set to run through 2028, like getting rid of federal taxes on tips for service workers. That's in there.
Okay, tips? Interesting.
And also on overtime pay. No federal tax on that either, temporarily.
And what about things maybe more for like average families or individuals?
Yeah.
Deductions, credits, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the sources point to temporary increases for the standard deduction. It's $1,000 more for individuals, $2,000 if you file jointly.
Okay.
And the child tax credit gets a temporary boost too, an extra $500, bringing it up to $2,500. But again, that's temporary until 2028, according to the sources.
Gotcha. Until 2028.
And there's even like a specific deduction mentioned for interest paid on auto loans, up to $10,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but there's a catch. The sources say it's only for cars assembled in the U.S., and that one's temporary too, runs until 2029.
Ah, the U.S. assembled detail is key. Okay, so a real mix of permanent changes and these temporary sweeteners. What about stuff aimed more at, say, higher earners? Or businesses.
Right. For higher earners, the estate tax exemption level would go up quite a bit. Sources say up to $15 million.
$15 million?
Yeah. And also an increase mentioned for the cap on the SALT deduction, state and local taxes.
Oh, right. That's always controversial.
Yeah. Currently, it's capped at $10. The sources say this bill would raise it to $40,000.
$40,000.
But only for incomes up to $500,000. Then there's some kind of phase-out structure above that, according to the material.
Okay. And for businesses specifically, any changes noted there?
Sources mention businesses could deduct 23% of their qualified business income. That's up from 20%.
Okay, a bump there.
And also a temporary thing allowing full expensing for domestic R&D costs. And for asset purchases, too. You can deduct the full cost in the year you spend the money. The idea, the sources suggest, is to get companies investing more.
Okay, wow. That is a lot just on the tax side. Let's shift gears. Another huge area the sources talk about is border security and immigration. What's the plan there, according to the bill?
Yeah, big focus. The sources report some pretty substantial funding increases, like $46.5 billion earmarked just for restarting the border wall construction.
$46.5 billion for the wall.
Exactly. And then there's a lot of money for hiring more people. Between 3,000 and maybe 4,100 new Border Patrol agents.
Okay.
Plus 5,000 new customs officers. And the sources mentioned over $2 billion just for signing bonuses and retention bonuses to get and keep those agents.
So significant personnel increases, anything beyond Border Patrol and customs officers.
Yep. The bill also funds hiring 10,000 more ICE officers and investigators.
10,000.
And there's this provision noted about charging a $1,000 fee to asylum seekers. The sources describe that as pretty unusual, a rare kind of policy for the U.S.
A fee for asylum seekers. Okay. So more infrastructure, more personnel. Did the sources mention any kind of overall goals for immigration enforcement in this section, like numbers?
They did. The material cites specific goals, like removing 1 million immigrants every year.
1 million a year.
And also having the capacity to hold 100,000 people in detention centers.
Right. Okay, let's move to the third big pillar that kept coming up in the sources, defense and national security. What's the impact there?
Another area with a big spending increase, according to the sources. Nearly $150 billion in new money for the Defense Department and national security more broadly.
$150 billion new. Were there specific things highlighted within that? Where's the money going?
Yes, the sources point to some specific allocations, like $25 billion for something called the Golden Dome for America. It's described as a missile defense system.
Golden Dome.
Okay. There's also $21 billion mentioned for ammunition, resupplying ammo stocks.
Makes sense.
And $34 billion for expanding the Navy's fleet. And $9 billion specifically tagged for improving quality of life for service members, things like housing, health care, that kind of stuff.
Okay. So major investments highlighted across taxes, the border, and defense. But as we said, this bill is huge. It goes way beyond that, right? The materials you shared really dig into changes in social policy, environmental stuff, too.
Oh, absolutely. It
Ooh.
definitely does. Let's get into that. Maybe start with Medicaid. The sources indicate that program is looking at almost $700 billion in reduced spending under this bill.
Wow, $700 billion reduction. That's massive. How do the sources say the bill plans to achieve that kind of cut?
Well, a main way noted is bringing in these new community engagement requirements.
Okay, what does that mean?
It would apply to able-bodied adults who don't have dependents between 19 and 64 years old.
Yeah.
And to stay eligible for Medicaid, they'd have to do at least 80 hours a month of activities like work or education or community service.
80 hours a month. Okay. Any changes to how often people have to prove they're eligible?
Yeah, sources mentioned they'd have to verify eligibility twice a year instead of just once a year now.
Okay, more frequent checks.
And what's really highlighted in the material is how fast these changes have to happen. The implementation timeline got accelerated. States have to have this running by December 31st, 2026 at the latest.
Wow, that's a quick turnaround for such big changes. Are there other, policy restrictions for Medicaid in the bill?
Sources mention a couple of others, like a ban on Medicaid covering gender transition services for kids and adults.
Yeah.
And it also reportedly cuts federal funding to states if they use their Medicaid infrastructure, the systems, to provide health coverage for undocumented immigrants.
Right. So given how big these changes are, what did the sources say about the reactions, the potential impact?
Well, the reactions noted are pretty stark, as you'd expect. Lots of warnings from critics that millions of people could lose their health coverage. Yeah. The sources cite the CBO, that's the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. They estimated that just these Medicaid changes alone could mean at least 7.6 million fewer people with health insurance.
7.6 million from the Medicaid changes.
Wow. And wasn't there a specific quote that got a lot of attention?
Yeah.
From Senator Joni Ernst.
Oh, yes. That was everywhere in the sources. A constituent apparently asked her about people potentially dying because of Medicaid cuts.
Right.
And sources report her initial response was, "We all are going to die."
Oof.
Yeah. The material says she did clarify later, saying she meant it compassionately and that people who meet the requirements would be fine. And then apparently she even posted some kind of sarcastic apology video about it. It really shows how intense and sensitive the debate around specific changes is.
Yeah, clearly very charged.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift to another big social program mentioned. SNAP, that's the food assistance program, right? What changes did the sources highlight there?
Right, SNAP. Sources indicate spending there would be cut by about $267 billion over 10 years.
$267 billion. And similar to Medicaid, there are expanded work requirements mentioned. They'd apply to able-bodied adults without dependents up to age 64 now. It's currently 54.
So raising the age for a work requirement.
Exactly. And the exemption for parents caring for a child. That gets tighter, too. Sources say it would only apply if the child is under 7 years old. Right now, it goes up to age 18.
Down from 18 to under 7. That's a big change.
It is. And the material also notes that states would apparently have to pick up more of the costs, like 5% of the benefits and 75% of the administrative costs.
Okay, so significant restructuring in Medicaid and SNAP. What about environmental policy? Clean energy. The sources indicate the bill touches that, too.
It definitely does. The sources describe changes mainly focused on rolling back some previous policies, like the bill would repeal or phase out existing clean energy tax credits faster than planned.
Okay, accelerating the phase out.
Yeah, and moving up the eligibility timeline for renewable power plant credits, too. Those sources note an exception for nuclear power plants.
And what about public lands? Any changes there?
Yes. To potentially raise revenue, the bill reportedly increases opportunities for leasing public lands, for drilling, mining, logging.
Or leasing.
And it also proposes cutting the royalty rates that companies have to pay when they extract resources. And sources also flagged a late addition that authorizes selling off some public lands in Nevada and Utah. That reportedly caused quite an uproar.
Selling public lands. Okay. And anything about transportation fees or anything?
Yeah, sources note the bill adds new annual federal registration fees, $250 a year for electric vehicles,
$250 for EVs.
and $100 a year for hybrids.
Right. Okay. So a really wide net cast by this bill: social programs, environment, transportation. Now let's pivot to something that sources say really blew up recently, caused a lot of buzz.
Yeah.
This provision about artificial intelligence, AI.
Yes, this is where the sources really zoom in on a specific, very hot controversy. There's a section apparently on pages 278 and 279 of the bill.
Okay. What does it do?
According to the material we looked at, it basically contains language that would stop states or cities or any local government from regulating AI models or systems.
Stop states from regulating AI.
Yeah, or automated decision systems if they're used in interstate commerce. And this ban would last for 10 years.
10 years. Wow. And the reaction to this from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene was pretty dramatic, wasn't it, according to the sources?
It really was, and widely reported. She publicly said, on X, the platform, that she actually didn't know this section was in the bill when she voted yes on it in the House.
She didn't know it was there.
That's what the sources report her saying.
So what did she say when she found out about it?
Sources quote her saying she is adamantly opposed to it, called it a violation of state rights and potentially dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And she reportedly even said that if she had known about the AI part, she would have voted NO on the whole bill, and that she won't vote for it again if it comes back from the Senate with that AI provision still in it.
That's quite an admission. And the sources said that admission itself got a lot of criticism.
Oh, yeah. The material includes some pretty blunt reactions. Things like, you have one job, followed by, to read the F bill.
Right.
And commentators noted it wasn't just her. Sources quote some online chatter pointing out that other members had apparently also admitted voting without really reading the whole thing.
Were there other reactions specifically to the content of the AI provision, not just about Representative Greene not reading it?
Yes. For instance, Senator Chris Murphy is quoted in the sources calling it a present to the big AI company.
Present.
His view, as reported, was that it could strip away consumer protections that states might otherwise put in place. And sources also suggest other Republican lawmakers have concerns about this specific AI part, too.
Yeah, this whole AI thing really seems to highlight a broader point the sources brought up about the legislative process itself and just the general reaction to the bill. Like we said, over 1,000 pages passed by one vote.
Exactly. And the sources collected a real spectrum of reactions to the whole package. Democrats, generally speaking, used really negative language. Sources quote things like extreme and toxic, or that big bad bill, even the big ugly bill.
Big bad bill, okay.
And even people outside politics jumped in. Wow. Elon Musk reportedly called the bill a disgusting abomination.
Ouch. And even within the Republican Party, sources noted it wasn't exactly smooth sailing, right? Not everyone was on board.
That's right. Yeah, fiscal conservatives. Sources mentioned Senators Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Susan Collins looking to kind of hem in parts of the bill. They're worried about the deficit impact.
Right, the spending.
Yeah. Rand Paul is specifically mentioned as opposing the language in the bill about the debt ceiling. And sources captured reports about President Trump's reaction to Paul's stance on that. And then sources also mentioned Republicans in swing districts who are reportedly nervous about how the proposed cuts to aid programs might play back home with their constituents.
So different factions, different concerns, even within the party pushing it. Beyond these huge policy areas and the AI mess, did the sources flag any other, maybe smaller, but still notable provisions or details that got attention?
Yeah, there were definitely a few other things mentioned. One is a provision that would get rid of the $200 federal tax on gun silencers. That tax has been around since 1934.
Eliminate the silencer tax?
Yeah. Sources note the NRA supports that, while opponents worry it could make it harder for police to figure out where shots are coming from in an active shooter situation.
Okay. And something about Planned Parenthood, too.
Correct. Sources indicate the bill would stop Medicaid funds from going to Planned Parenthood clinics.
And the reaction?
Democrats, as reported in the material, argue that would cut off access to essential health services, not just abortion, but cancer screenings, birth control for millions who rely on those clinics.
Got it. Were there any completely new things created by the bill? New programs?
Yes. Sources mentioned the creation of these $1,000 savings accounts for children. Apparently, they were first called mega accounts, but got renamed Trump accounts.
Trump accounts. Okay, how would they work?
The material describes the federal government putting $1,000 in for kids born between 2024 and 2028. Then parents could add more money. There are rules about how the money could be used when the child turns 18, with full access at age 30.
Interesting. Okay. What about student loans? That's always a big topic.
Another big one, yeah. Sources report a major overhaul of the whole student loan system. It's projected to save the government something like $330 billion.
$330 billion in savings. How?
It would reportedly replace all the different repayment plans we have now with just two options. And it would also repeal those Biden administration rules that were meant to help borrowers who got defrauded by their colleges.
Repeal the borrower defense rules. Okay. And one last thing, anything impacting universities directly.
Sources mention a potential tax hike up to 21% on the endowments of some university.
Taxing endowments more heavily. Okay. Let's just quickly touch on some economic context the sources brought up. The OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, they changed their forecast for U.S. growth recently.
Yeah, they did. Reportedly slashed it pretty significantly. They're predicting slower growth now, like 1.6% in 2025, then 1.5% in 2026.
Slower growth. Why?
Sources indicate the OECD report partly blames President Trump's tariff policies for creating economic uncertainty, and also his efforts to cut back on immigration and the federal workforce. The report is cited predicting this slowdown would be kind of concentrated in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, assuming those tariffs stay in place.
And it's interesting to see that forecast alongside President Trump's own statements about tariffs, which were also mentioned in the sources.
Absolutely. Sources report him claiming the tariffs mean the economy is booming.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, definitely contrasts with that OECD analysis you pulled out.
Yeah. Okay, one final really crucial detail mentioned in the sources, kind of fundamental to the whole bill, the debt limit. What's the story there?
Right. So the House version of the OBBB reportedly includes language that would raise the national debt ceiling by $4 trillion.
$4 trillion just tacked onto the bill.
Sources indicate, yeah, it was put into this budget package partly as a way for Republicans to get around having separate direct negotiations with Democrats just on raising the debt limit.
And what happens if the debt limit isn't raised? What did the sources say about that?
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is quoted in the sources warning the U.S. could run out of money to pay its bills, potentially as soon as August, if Congress doesn't act.
August deadline.
Yeah. And like we mentioned earlier, Senator Rand Paul is on record in the sources saying he'll oppose the whole bill if that debt limit language isn't taken out.
Okay. So just stepping back after this deep dive into the sources, wow. This one big, beautiful bill definitely earns the big part of its name, right? Scope is just immense. It's not just tweaking things. It hits huge areas like tax policy, defense spending, but also really fundamental changes to social safety nets, Medicaid, SNAP plus environmental rules, and even jumping into brand new territory like AI regulation.
And when you try to tackle that much complex stuff all at once, you inevitably get tons of trade-offs. And the impacts rivel out across totally different parts of society, the economy, which, as the sources clearly show, leads to these incredibly varied reactions. Sometimes it even splits people within the same party, like we saw so clearly with that AI provision and Representative Greene's reaction.
And that really just hammers home why trying to understand what's actually in these giant bills and maybe even paying attention to the process, how they get debated, changed, or maybe voted on without being fully read, like the sources highlighted why it's all so important. Because this stuff directly touches so many parts of your life.
Exactly right. And maybe it leaves us and you listening with a final thought based on everything the sources laid out. When you have legislation that's incredibly complex, affecting everything from decades-old programs to bleeding-edge tech like AI, and you see the kind of procedural challenges and controversies the sources pointed out, what does this whole episode tell us about the sheer difficulty of making laws effectively in today's world? It's definitely something to chew on as this bill, or whatever comes next, moves forward.